Digging into Steering Wonder Part 4 now. I'm going to be adjusting the front lower control arms on this JL, and I'm going to be using my angle finder on the differential to make sure that I get around 7.5 degrees of caster on the passenger side, ideally. I'm hoping between a little more caster up front and the hellwig rear sway bar, and we maybe get it as dialed in as it can get. I'm also maybe gonna play with tire pressure one more time. I'm gonna loosen up the jam nut on the lower, and then I'll loosen the frame side, loosen the axle side, and should be able to get some adjustment there. All right. The front caster is still a little on the light side for what I personally prefer to drive, and I think it might help with some of the extra pull. The other thing too is we really don't have a lot more caster on the passenger side. So what I want to do is give one turn on the lower, longer on the passenger side to try to get a little more caster. That'll usually help counteract the crown of the road and help with a mild right pull and help it steer more straight when you're driving. And so we're going to try that out today and see what it does. So the nuts on these are a 24, and then these are a 21 on the outside. All right, so this says our caster is 6.8 degrees. That's 89.2 angled back. The printout said 6.6, so we're pretty darn close. So I know to subtract 0.2 because 90 degrees is 6 degrees of caster. So this is 6.8, which equates to 6.6 on the rack. So I want to go another maybe full degree, maybe 3/4 to half degree more. Let's see how many turns. Just counting the turns on the threads. 2 full threads and then that last kind of half threads. Again, that looks like 2.5 threads. We might be able to call that 3. So I'm gonna write that down on some scratch board and just track what we're doing. So in case I stop in the middle and take a break or anything, we'll have to work on it tomorrow, that I don't get totally lost and forget where I was at. So I don't just do this for my YouTube videos, but I do it for personal use as well. I'm gonna call that 2.5 because once again, it's the 2 full plus the last thread. This is horrible organization, but my caster on the dial or angle finder was 6.8 degrees. The printout gave me 6.6. And so I want to try to get to the range of 7.2 to 7.5 with maybe 7.2 on the driver and 7.5 on the passenger, something of that range. So that's what I'm shooting for. We'll see if we can actually get there. We won't be able to measure the cross caster, so what I'll do is I'll set it the same number of turns. It'll read the same number on the differential, and then I'll give one more turn to the pass side to count for the crown of the road. So we're at 88.5, we were at 89.2, so we got that 3/4 of a degree further back overall, and then I'm actually gonna push the passenger side forward one more turn. So I'm gonna call this side done. Okay, now for some weird math. The old calculation, 89.2 on the diff equals 6.8 degrees. That's the 6 plus the 0.8 equals 6.6 on the alignment printout. That means 88.5, we're gonna add that 0.7, so we're gonna go from 6.8 to 7.5 degrees, minusing that 0.2, we're at 7.3 degrees of caster, which I think is a great number. I wanted to be a little bit over 7 without being too much. I think giving one more turn on that passenger side lower is gonna get us there. As we were just talking about in the printout, 2 turns, which on the rear arms measured 0.089, so we kind of got 0.09. 0.18 turned into about 0.7 more degrees of caster. If that helps anyone when they're trying to play with caster numbers on their lowers, another 0.18 inches roughly. I mean, maybe 0.19, maybe 0.17. It's in that ballpark, depending on the thickness of your thread pitch, right? Is going to give you that 0.7 degrees more caster. So if you're at 5.5 and you want to get up to 7, you're going to almost want to double that and do 4 turns out to get to that 7 roughly. I mean, as a ballpark starting point. The one thing I'm not covering is adjusting the upper arms. And if your wheelbase is good and you're happy with your wheelbase and where everything's sitting in the front, you can always adjust out the upper arms instead. I'm kind of being lazy because I hate doing the upper arms, because when the top of the axle rotates forward instead of the bottom, it becomes much, much harder to get those upper arms back in. I usually use the punches. I'll use a bunch of these punches in the upper arms, loosen them up, stick those in there and adjust one side out like half a turn to a turn at a time, and stick the punch in there and go back and forth, back and forth. And I really just hate adjusting the uppers. I wish they were double adjusted. I wish Metalcloak or Rock Crawler or anyone out there would do a double adjuster on the uppers, because then you could just loosen 2 jam nuts and then you could literally fine tune. You could fine tune caster in like 5 minutes. You'd just be adjusting 2 jam nuts, 1 on each side, versus removing the lower arms, measuring, turning, and having to retorque the lower arms. So anyways, once again, I hope that helps someone out there who's trying to figure out their caster and how to get more caster. You definitely need adjustable arms or some drop brackets or both. In this case, I got both. We are now at 88 degrees, which is 2 degrees, which is 8 degrees of caster, which is kind of a lot. So now I'm in a conundrum. Once I tighten everything back up and shake everything around, that might come in or it might go out. There is some slop in those bolt holes, and so once I final torque everything, that and torque the jam nuts and everything, that might be a little more than I want. So yeah, with our weird math again, remember how we were at 89.2, that measures 6.8, which on the rack measured 6.6. It was dead even on both sides pretty much. We did 2 full turns on the passenger and 2 full turns on the driver, and then I did another full turn on the passenger. That gave us a little more overall caster. So the passenger side now has more caster, but since it's a straight axle, it rotates the whole axle back. Let me see if I can explain that, because basically, as you know, if you don't know already, caster is the imaginary line through the ball joints, upper and lower, and it's the perpendicular line to the upper. It's the angle of the perpendicular line through the ball joints that's off that axle center line. So we want the axle to be kicked back, not forward. So kick the axle this way, that's negative caster. Kick the axle that way, it's positive caster. So now we have, I'm gonna say because it's measuring 8 on there, it's actually 7.8 on the rack, which means because I've given this side one more turn, this side's probably really at 7.8. I'm gonna say this side's probably more at 7.5. I'm gonna do some final torque and see what happens. So I can't physically torque these to 190 and hold the wrench on the other side, laying on my back with 6 inches of leverage. I think if I was up on a lift, it wouldn't be a problem. And so I came up with something on one day where I was just so desperate to figure out a way to do this that I ended up using a jack stand under a wrench to hold the wrench in place so I could use all my strength to torque to 190. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So, might be hard to see right there, but there's a wrench on that nut, and I kind of slid the jack stand right under it to hold it in place. That way, I can torque these things with both arms on just the torque wrench. Instead of trying to lay on my back and try to torque with like one arm, maybe my good arm, and try to hold the wrench while it turns. So that works really, really good. That's my little trick that I've learned from these JLs. On the crawler, I just hammer it home with the impact gun. But with the JL, it's a daily driver, I like to torque everything to spec as much as possible. So anyways, that's a trick. Hope it helps someone. So yeah, on top of using a jack stand to hold this wrench to torque so I could do the 190 foot-pounds. I'll sometimes use another jack stand right here under the extension on the torque wrench. Otherwise, this guy wants to flop usually down and fall off the bolt. And this guy, if you're trying to torque to 190 foot-pounds, you're not going to get there with one arm unless you're really strong. So yeah, I like to use two arms on this thing. On this back side, and I'm going up with this thing. There we go. 87.9, which would be 8.1, but we're really at like 7.9. You know, there's a little bit of a delta there. It's not 100%. So you can see, put a jack stand under the extension so it doesn't want to fall down. Jack stand under the wrench. I've only had to start doing this in the last couple of years when we bought this JL. I've never had to do this with like an XJ with 9/16 bolts. And so, like I said, I just couldn't ever torque them to spec otherwise. It's torqued. So we settled in. We went from 89.2 at the diff, at the plugs for the case spreader, to 88.5, to 88 with one more turn, to 79.9 after things settled, which is 8.1 degrees of caster. I'm just using the delta from the racking it up at the shop from the printouts there. We were actually closer to 7.9 degrees caster. We did give it one more turn on the passenger side to adjust for the crown of the road. So I finally was able to get it to drive straight. The 8 degrees of caster made a massive difference. The hellwig rear sway bar took out a lot of the rear body roll, and also adding the Evo rear track bar mount, raising the rear roll center, helped it drive drastically better as well. So all three of those things in the rear, or those two things in the rear, and then the extra caster up front made a massive difference, and it drives way better. I've now driven it to a couple quick one-night events, and it feels amazing on like main highways. Doesn't seem like it's wandering anymore. It's tracking really straight. Took it out for like an easy, quick one-night wheeling trip, and did great. And we've been driving it a lot too, all over the place, and no complaints. So I think after this being what, the fourth Deathwobble steering wander video, I'm hoping this is it for now. I don't think it needs anything else, but we have thrown a ton of parts at it. I'm hoping none of the tie rod ends or track bar mounts fail anytime soon. That being said, thank you for following today, and if you can, like, subscribe, comment, notifications, all that good stuff. It helps me grow the channel. All right, and get out there and go wheel.